So, hello and welcome to Blueprint Cymru, a podcast bringing ideas, experience and ambition to the conversation of building a better future for Wales. My name is Simon Hobson. In today's episode, I'm joined by Neil Roberts. Neil is a seasoned compliance professional with a career rooted in financial services industry, holding a master's degree in financial services management from the University of South Wales and a Bachelor of Science in economies and politics from Cardiff University. Neil brings a rare combination of financial expertise and political insight to his work. Passionate about financial literacy, diversity and inclusion, and the economic case for Welsh independence, he champions the idea that ethical government, informed citizens, and inclusive economies are essential to becoming a more resilient and prosperous Wales. Welcome to the podcast, Neil.
Thank you for having me.
So perhaps we could start at the beginning, just give us a little bit of background yourself, where you grew up and your earlier experiences in life within Wales.
Yeah, so I was born in Pwllheli in Gwynedd, lived there for the first 20 years of my life, from a sort of a Welsh-speaking family. Went to university in Cardiff in 2011 and spent 3 years there doing my degree in politics, and then I've lived in Cardiff ever since. Originally from Penllyn, and very, very standard sort of North Wales upbringing. But then I obviously moved to Cardiff, and I've just essentially not left because I enjoy it so much.
Have you ever been offered or thought about moving outside of Wales?
No, it hasn't crossed my mind. This country is rooted deep in my family. My family have lived here for, I'd probably say, centuries, and I can't imagine myself ever leaving, because as much as there is a big world out there, I think Wales still has a future to play its part in that. And as we're going to discuss today, I think there's things that we can do differently to have a new sort of Welsh identity in the world. But I don't envisage ever leaving. And I think I've got plenty of years ahead of me to give back to my country.
And so, obviously, with your background and your profession, you've spoken, and I spoke in the introduction about your desire to help educate people in financial literacy within Wales. Why do you think it's but that's not just a personal responsibility, but it's also something that the educational system and maybe wider society needs to have a role in?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, across the UK is we've had declining levels of financial literacy over the years, and you see that in numerous surveys that have been done in recent years. And Wales in particular, it's quite low down the list. I think it was 9th out of the 12 nations and regions of the UK. The benchmark is around 6.5 out of 10 questions that people, if they answer correctly, means that they're financially literate. I think the average in Wales was 4.7, whilst in Scotland it was higher, and it was around 5.3. So if we think of another devolved country where the government has a role in education, Wales in particular, there's a stark difference between the outcomes that we see in Wales and what we see in Scotland. I think Scotland was second on the list actually on that as well. So it just goes to show, that their strategy is working maybe a little bit better. Obviously, that number in Scotland is still below the benchmark. So I think whatever we can do to increase that benchmark, will mean that the children that are in education at the moment, when they go into adulthood, they will have the skills that they need to to know about savings, mortgages, tax, credit. It's a huge sort of passion of mine, which is people being aware of not just their consumer rights, but also, the different products that are out there for them, and how they can use them to better their life chances, essentially. And I think Wales's schools and places of further education, this is where, I think you can learn these things throughout life, but I think these are the crucial parts where, if we embed it into our children and our young people who are our future, then that's the most opportune time to do it.
So I've seen a number of things on social media and other places with people in their 20s and late teens discussing their lack of knowledge around what a council tax bill is and how they go about paying for it, and how they approach the council and different authorities to query bills and things like that. So is that something that you're advocating for to be taught at schools? Is it that alone, or is it more than that?
So it would be further than that. I think those important taxes that nobody can avoid. They're things that we put in as members of society. They are things that I think our young people and our children need to know about at adequate stages of their life. But it's also things like, what is a credit card? What is APR? What's inflation? It's all things that have an impact on our economic present and future. They're things that I never had an education on when I was in secondary school or primary school. And we see evidence that says that a lot of people do get their sort of financial education at this stage. They don't. A lot of the things that they do in their adult life with regards to their money is taught at a younger age. So yeah, things like the taxes they pay and why they pay them, I think those are important things that we need to instill into our young people. People they get paid their salary, and they see the numbers, with regards to their tax or national insurance, but we never know fully, what the implications of that is. So I think it's not only just an economic benefit, but it's about showing that there is a societal reason why, we have things like tax, insurance, financial products, the reason why people save, and so on. I think there are things that will have a societal benefit as well as an economic one.
And why do you think that information's not being passed down from a member of the family? Maybe I was fortunate, but I remember having different generations in my family, and maybe cousins and things that were older than me, that explained things like credit cards to me.
Yeah, I think it does come down to the people that shape you as a person, but it's also, I think it is a difficult subject to teach people. I think if you were to ask anyone on the street, do you consider it an interesting topic, I don't think many would agree with you. And I think they see it as a sort of a subject that's quite dry, and it is quite complicated as well. And I think the reason why people feel that way is because, in my view, things aren't explained in terms that they will recognize. And I think there's a space, especially these days, for these things to be taught in new ways. Using social media might be a really good avenue to do that. And then also, I guess it's just who takes on that responsibility. I think you're right that there are people within the family that have that responsibility. We learn a lot from our parents and our grandparents, but obviously, if they don't have the same skills to teach those elements, then they're never going to be passed down. So there has to be a space then for government and the third sector to fill in those gaps. And at the moment, I don't think that they are. I think in the third sector in particular, things are changing in Wales. I've seen some good evidence from some third sector organisations in Wales where they are trying to bridge that gap. I think Money Ready is one of the good examples, where they are trying to go into schools and say, you know, this is what financial products are, this is what they mean, and you know why they're important. But I think what that shows personally is that there is a failure in other sectors to actually engage people in the information that they need. So government is a good example where, you know, in the education sector, I think we need to rethink how we're teaching these subjects at the moment.
You mentioned a bit earlier about Scotland having a slightly higher number when it came to the surveys. Do you think that's solely down to government policy within Scotland, or is the fact that there are a number of large international banks based up in Scotland impacting that as well?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of those things. I think you know, Edinburgh was considered the next big financial centre after London, and you know, that obviously has its implications on society there, and you know, I think it also shows obviously there'll be people that live in Edinburgh who work in that sector, and I think Cardiff is a good example where things are improving in that sector. I think you know, when I started in the financial services industry almost 10 years ago, it's completely changed from then even, and you know, there was discussion as to why that was happening, but I think the fact that we have a growing financial services industry in Cardiff is a good. It will help, I think, Wales to get to where it needs to be. But I think as well that there's a culture in Scotland where there's a little bit a bit more independence to do things differently. I think you know, I think governance in Wales has been it's not thinking about how we can govern as Wales at the moment. I think it's still trapped in a sort of England and Wales bubble when it comes to these sort of things. Obviously, education's been devolved for 26 years, but I don't think we've gone far enough to have you know, a Wales-specific strategy with regards to this particular topic and others to fill in those gaps.
So in your experience and your knowledge, what do you find are the most common misconceptions people have in Wales about money and credit and investment?
I think I would sort of frame it differently in the sense that I think people see spending in particular as a bad thing, and the best way to explain that is that spending can be bad, good, and neutral. I think when you think of things like credit and investment, credit can be a good thing because what it does is it shows you're willing to invest in certain things, and then you are making an obligation to obviously pay back your creditors. But many people still don't have the knowledge around you know, how you pay your credit responsibly, and then also you know, things like credit scores, but also the misconceptions around investment is that because we see big spending in other parts of the UK, we see these big numbers and we think, oh, there must be a lot of waste, in which there is. But the investment that you make today, it's actually an asset. It becomes an asset eventually. I think you know, if we have this complete aversion to spending at every stage, what we're going to do is we're going to choke off demand, and what that eventually does is that it means that the economy will just completely continue to stagnate. I think that's what Wales in particular has missed, is that I mean, I would argue that it doesn't have the economic levers it needs to make the credible investments. But I think within the powers that we currently have as a nation, we're not using them in the best possible way. And I think things like having the development and investment bodies from central government that are completely focused on building the communities up from the ground, from the bottom up, that would be transformational. But at the moment, I think this goes back to sort of the time of austerity, is that there's still this aversion to spending because they see it as waste. But actually, there's such an opportunity with the talent and the resources that we have. If we were to invest in those communities, I think we would see not just financial literacy grow within the population, but also the economic growth that we're so desperately looking for.
So something you're highlighting there is, I would see as quite a traditional mindset of, never spending beyond your means. It's something that my father has. He's very conscientious of always paying off his credit card in full every single month, and never borrowing money if he doesn't ever, really have to. But is that the only literacy gap that you see in communities in Wales? And what would be your ideas of how we close those gaps?
Yeah, I think in particular we see kind of a variance across the age groups and across the regions. I think if you were to cut down Wales into the regions of Wales itself, I think you would see some divergences there as well. I think I think in particular what we need to do is to actually start closing these gaps, is to, yes, support the third sector to do the work that they need to do, but we also need to introduce something within the curriculum to start getting to young people much sooner, to teach them about not just things like credit, but also mortgages, tax, and also just really to explain why we have these things. I think, the reason we have credit, for instance, it's because it helps the economy sustain itself, because we have, someone borrowing from another. If you borrow from a bank, they then, or rather, if you have savings in a bank, they use that money to lend that out to another person. And then, if you were to ask someone, do they know that the fact that their savings are being used, on the balance sheet of the bank to be borrowed out to someone else? I don't think they would know that. And so things like savings are really important, because if more people had savings in the bank's balance sheet would mean that they can lend more out to people who need to, grow businesses and, make investments in their life. Those are things that I think if we were to teach people that, I think they would feel more confident to make those life choices that would better their life.
And do you think that having that financially literate population reduces the risk to the Welsh economy? And if so, how does it go about reducing that risk?
Yeah, it definitely does. I think it's things like the resilience of family households to deal with financial shocks. And I think what we've seen is, especially in the last sort of 10 years, is we've seen economic shock after economic shock. And the reason why the Welsh population in particular aren't as resilient as perhaps maybe a wealthy part of England is because we've not had a culture of teaching the Welsh people the skills that they need to think about savings, think about credit, and it's been proven as well that, or there's evidence to suggest that where you have higher financial literacy, there's a higher chance that household in particular will have a higher income as well. So I think if we were to be serious about having a more financially resilient population, especially against the shocks that we see, we see wars and constitutional changes like Brexit, which had a huge impact, then I think we would have better preparation for the shocks that could come. So I think it's, going back to spending, I think if we were to spend the money from government to say, we're going to teach every Welsh person the skills they need when it comes to their financial lives, then I think you'd see many benefits from that, I think.
Thanks. I'd like to talk a bit about diversity and equality and inclusion. Obviously, that's something you advocate for as being, not an afterthought, but an everyday part of life. But as an economic and cultural asset, perhaps could you sort of explain why DEI makes us richer as a society?
Yeah, and I think I just premise this question with premise the answer with saying that I know DEI at the moment is a very contentious topic. I think we see it online that there's a lot of noise around DEI, in particular with the sort of changes we've seen in the US and populist governments around the globe sort of rejecting DEI. In my view, the reason why they do that is because they don't fully understand it. And I think, to explain why I think it would make us richer as a society if we were to not go down that road is because that I think the whole purpose of DEI is not to say because you fit into one particular minority group, you should have, a better outcome. What it's saying is that we see you as an individual, we see what makes you who you are, and we are ready and prepared to celebrate that and to give you the same opportunities that anyone else would have. And I think the reason why people have turned against DEI to a degree is because they haven't had this explained to them. As somebody who I live openly as an LGBT person, I don't see this as something other than to say, I know that without the rights that my community have won, I would not be able to live freely as I do now. If for any reason someone was to say that we don't care about that, then I would feel that I wouldn't be able to fully live my life as openly as I do, and then also to be happy in the things that I do in life, because it's a fundamental part of who I am. And what DEI does to us as a society is it says that we see that part of who you are, we understand the systematic, legal or societal barriers that you have faced, and we want to make your life better, and not better at the expense of others. That's not what it's for. But if every community felt that way, if every community felt that they were not just tolerated but accepted and celebrated, then I think what happens is that those individuals go on to invest in themselves and also contribute more to society. I think they want to essentially give back to the society that accepts them. I think it goes back to the whole, conversations that many people are having at the moment around the social contract. Whether that's still, I think a lot of people feel like the social contract is been diminished slightly. Things like DEI help us get to a point where we say society is stronger because we see every individual for who they are. And I think it's not just a moral case. I think it is an economic case as well. And it sets us out as well. And if you think of countries in Europe who are very pro sort of DEI, so think of countries like Norway, for example, they do very well on every metric when it comes to well-being, economic well-being, all those things do very well because people are allowed to be who they are and then also be celebrated for it. And I think, I think if we were to go down the road of going against that, I think it would be a detriment to us, not just morally, but also economically as well.
But you sort of highlighted as an evidence, maybe Norway as an example, and maybe the Scandinavian countries in general. But there are, of course, like net zero, as in the environmental side of things, there are people that say from a business outcomes point of view, DEI is an extra bit of red tape and paperwork, and it doesn't contribute to anything other than costing a business more in compliance. So what would your response be to someone that might think that?
Yeah, and I mean, what I would say is that I've heard those arguments over the years, and not just from a sort of DEI perspective, but also, I've even had, before 2011, there was hardly any, big financial regulation. It was only after the crash of 2008 that we saw a change in that sphere. And businesses were very worried at the time because they saw it as a financial burden of all these extra regulations and rules going onto their business. Obviously, there was a good reason for that because we saw a mismanagement of financial products across the Western world, which caused, in my view, it was caused by over risky behavior. And the reason why, and I think the reason why people are worried at the moment about these kind of things, so like DEI and also perhaps regulations in general and rules, is that they're worried that the economic situation at the moment is being further dampened by these things. But in my view, they actually support businesses. So, I've been doing compliance for a long time now, so I'm ready and ready to defend it. It's in every single role that I've ever done in compliance, I have seen failures by the business. And a lot of those failures are not because of malice or, because the, person who's interacting with the customer isn't particularly, bothered by the customer. It's because of poor policy. It's because of process failure. And it's also because we've not always understood what that customer wants. And I've seen it in every business I've worked in. And it's, I'm not putting these businesses down. I've been very happy to work for them. But the role of regulation and also things like DEI is to actually say, we need to look beyond what is just the black and white. The things that look simple on paper. We need to actually think about that particular individual, and then also how can we just make a better outcome for them, which then would have a better outcome on us. If a business, for instance, completely fails customers, that it's going to have a series of complaints. Those complaints are going to be costly, both for administrative and time purposes. If those complaints then get referred, there's a cost to the business. Just having good practice from the beginning actually saves the business money. And I've always said this, is that if you have a strong compliance framework in a business, in a financial services business, then you will save that business money, and you will also have a much happier customer base. And it's the same with, I make parallels with DEI in the sense that if we have a workforce that are happy and feel celebrated and feel like they could be themselves, they are going to contribute so much more than if, for instance, we didn't celebrate those things. And to the critics, I would say, go into a business or go to someone who is working in one of these businesses that where they are celebrated, ask them, do they feel more or less likely to give what they need to that business if DEI didn't exist? And I would tell you, I reckon 99% of them would say, I feel better working in this business because I am celebrated.
So do you think that the DEI practices in the financial sector are fairly embedded now? Because it's obviously, from my experience of working in the mining sector, both the mining sector and when, as a mining company, you go to raise money, it's very much a macho, chauvinistic tradition within both those sectors, and I wonder how much of the financial sector has truly changed its belief system, and how much of it is just ticking boxes to meet regulations. Have you an insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think it's difficult for me in particular to answer, because I think I have limitations, or I'd rather say I have limitations in answering it, because I'm a white, fairly middle-class male. So it's very difficult for me to sort of say what an experience for maybe a female colleague of mine is, or someone who is from an ethnic minority background. But what I would say is that, yes, we still have a problem with getting enough women on boards, getting enough people from a minority ethnic background on boards, people who are differently abled. And I think, and also even just people with different accents. I couldn't tell you the amount of times, I've gone to a sort of senior meeting and I've been the only person that has a regional accent. And some people get a bit surprised by it, because they think, they see me and they think they don't expect to hear sort of this strong GOG accent to come out. But I think in general there is a need, I think, for all industries to take this seriously, and it will be better for them as well, because I think they're missing a variety of perspectives that could help them. Our customers at the end of the day are going to be different. They're going to be from all different walks of life. They're going to have all different circumstances. And unless we reflect that, and I don't just mean the sort of operations side of the business, but also the senior management team, then we're not doing them a service, because I don't think we're considering their perspective enough.
So just to push on that a little bit,
yeah,
I think there's clearly a fairly large sector of society across Wales and broader United Kingdom that may agree with all of that, but feel perhaps that, as a white male, that they're being, because of those measures, that their needs are now being not taken into account. Now, there might not be any evidence to back that up, but that is clearly a feeling, I believe, in society. I think it might be a reason why politics is one of the reasons why politics is moving in the direction it seems to be moving in amongst certain groups of people and communities. Yeah, how would one, is this just a process that society has to go through, and it's a painful process, and we all need to keep our heads and keep having the open conversations, or is there something that actually needs to be addressed?
So I think everyone's opinion is valid. I think they always come from somewhere. I think there's always something which drives these these thoughts, and I would never want to go to someone and say, no, I don't think that's correct. The way I've always approached things is, even with people who I fundamentally disagree with, I will always listen to them. I'll always have that conversation, And I'll always try and find a way to kind of give my perspective and maybe perspective of others who would suggest that there's a different, evidence of how society is working at the moment. But I think it's really difficult at the moment, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to almost have these conversations against a barrage of very small, quick fire tweets and posts and, sharing of AI images and videos where I think people are they're trying their best to digest what is being given to them and to form opinions and, to have conversations with people. I think people are doing their best, but I think the issue we have is that to have these conversations these days, it's very difficult, because, I could spend an hour explaining to someone why DEI and financial literacy are important, but they might go to TikTok and see a 10-second video which tells them DEI is rubbish, it's not worth the time. They'll see, they'll say, they'll see a video saying, get your 20 grand in shares within the next week and your life will be sorted. And it's very difficult at the moment to have those conversations in a way where emotion is, you try your best to take emotion out of it and just try and explain some other people's experience, which is why, as I said at the beginning, I don't diminish the experience of those people who feel that way at the moment. I think if you were to ask me why they feel that way, I think a lot of it has to do with the economic situation we're in. I think people feel that their life chances aren't as great as their parents were. They feel frustrated because of poor governance. I think they feel frustrated because nothing seemed to have worked very well in the last sort of 10 years. If you think of sort of public services, for example, and they do a lot of things. I think they're doing their best in the circumstances that they're working under. But I think people are just frustrated and they're fed up, and I think they see something like DEI as a good example of something that won't benefit them. But what I would argue against that is that I think it benefits everyone, and we need to look at the systemic issues, why people feel so frustrated and fed up, and find solutions and have those conversations as best as we can.
So leading from that, then obviously Wales is finding itself and its own identity and developing a much stronger voice nowadays. And obviously New Wales wants to help with that conversation, hence why we're doing these podcasts. But how do you think that like a stronger focus within Wales on different cultures and also the culture of Wales, which is distinct from England, it will help the Welsh economy thrive and also society?
Yeah, I think inclusion of all the communities in Wales is something that I think we need to have a better sort of understanding of, and also more opportunities to bring communities together. And I know that sounds kind of like a sort of a empty slogan, but I think the way that we do that is, I think it goes back to having the conversations between the communities, but also we need to have an open, honest, and frank discussion about where do we see Wales in the future, where is it at the moment, but also where do we see it in the future. I think there's many different people in Wales who have different experiences and from different areas, and we have the Welsh-speaking Wales, we have the English-speaking Wales, we have people from mining communities, from rural communities, and for a country that is only 3 million people, we have a very, very diverse set of people. And I don't that goes between towns even. It's very for a country 3 million people, we have very different people across it. And I think it goes back to, I think one of the things that we can do to help that is to have a more Welsh focused media. I think there are things that have changed in the last sort of 10 years to help with that, and I think New Wales is a good example of how we do that. And then also the things like having more conversations in things like Wales Online, Nation Cymru, but also giving voice to people who are not within the media bubble. So, having more people from North Wales and more people from West Wales and more people from the border community, having more stories about their communities and their lives, I think would bring, better unity within the country. As far as what that would do to the country economically and socially, I think what it would do, it would help with, I think, the division between sort of how perhaps the North perceive the South and vice versa, and between West and East. But it would also mean that if we were to have people to think that, yes, I'm a Welsh person who believes that we have good government, that we are a united country, then they might make better or they might make different choices when it comes to investing in their lives and choosing to maybe stay in their communities instead of moving across the border. So I think the cultural inclusion bit needs to come with also economic and business development across these communities. And I think a lot of the communities, especially in sort of the South Wales valleys and also within the north, in the smaller towns and villages, they feel, I think, that a lot of the investment goes to Cardiff. And that's because obviously we have such high concentration of private investment in Cardiff. In those areas where they feel that, they need to know that their government, both on a national level, but also perhaps their local government, is that they have a chance to perhaps start a business or, and for that business to thrive. But they also have access and the same fairness that perhaps businesses in the bigger cities have. And I think that goes to things like lowering business rates, or having a reform of business rates at least. It's things like having cooperatives and better access to local supply chains. I think if you can do that, as well as looking at the cultural inclusion bit and making the Welsh people feel like, yes, they have a chance and an opportunity to give back to not just their community, but to their country, then the future for Wales would be much stronger, I think.
And leading on from that I believe that you have a belief that independence for Wales from the United Kingdom, can work economically and does make business sense. So, and you obviously you're educated in both economics and politics, and you work in financial compliance. So you have some grounding there. But how do you view that argument for Welsh independence making business sense? Obviously, to just put a few things in context, Wales runs a fiscal deficit of approximately £13 billion a year. Wouldn't that be exacerbated? The Barnett formula, I think, is there obviously, and then there's a block grant of about 21 billion a year. It goes to the Senedd, the government in Wales. So how would that be accounted for? And then there's the tax revenue plug, which is often put forward of being massively lower than what Wales would require. And then there are infrastructure concerns of you'd have to create quite expensive to the taxpayer structures like a central bank, improved revenue services, regulators, and so forth. There's a lot to consider there. So how does that go about? How does that make business sense to take an independent route?
Yeah, first of all, I would say that I think I'm just one person in this conversation. I think, or in this discussion that we need to have as a country. I think there'll be people out there who will listen to this and think and they disagree with everything I say, and and think that, as you said, that because of the fiscal deficit that we currently have, that independence is not something we should go down. I would argue that, firstly, that fiscal deficit is there whilst we're in the UK. The fact that the UK government still has so much power over the economic levers and tax within Wales, those things are still run by Westminster, and we have this deficit. The UK itself has a very large budget deficit, and has run one for many years now. I think the deficit is something we can tackle. I will say that the first thing I would say is that independence will be a journey. It won't be we have a referendum, we're going to be independent the next day, and then also we're not going to have all the things that we need in place. I think as we saw in other countries that have left the United Kingdom or left the empire back in the 20th century, they did have problems initially, and I think good example is Ireland. They had some very difficult economic circumstances in the beginning, but if you were to compare where Ireland is now and where Wales is, I think many people would say that Ireland does have a successful economy. I think Wales has one too, but it has a struggling. It's stagnating, and it has been for many years. So I would say that I think if we are to remain within the status quo, and we don't have the powers to do the changes we need to do, then I feel like our situation will either stay the same or it will get worse. And in my view, if we were to have a confidence in ourselves to say, yes, things could get difficult in the short term, but it would be a process to get where we need to be, which is an independent country, then there's a chance for us to develop our economy and our country in a way which benefits the whole of Wales. I think at the moment it doesn't work. I think too much power and money is centralized. I think that not enough investment has been given to the communities that have been left behind. And I think there's things that we constantly try to do to plug the gaps, but unless we have the full economic powers and levers to do that, I think we're at danger of continuing to stagnate, and that deficit problem would only get worse. But I don't sit here and kind of dismiss the unionist argument either. I think I think there'll be people out there who say, I have family in England. I enjoy my NHS and my welfare, and those are things that at the moment, things like the pension. Sorry, I enjoy my UK state pension. I'm very worried about that. So I understand the arguments that are being made. However, I think to have a better society for all of Wales, and to have a system where, yes, we can look about how we tax business in Wales, or we can look about how we invest in certain industries in Wales, things like green energy is a huge potential in Wales. And I think unless we have the control over those levers, a lot of the resources and the natural resources that we have could eventually be extracted out of Wales. So I think it's a difficult conversation to have, and I think, and I have sympathy with those who disagree still with that future. But I think the people of Wales deserve a better future, I think. And the best way we can do that, in my view, is to be a confident, independent nation in doing so.
And what role do you think that business leaders and financial sector maybe in Wales, and obviously there's 3 million Welsh diaspora that have got skills and knowledge and money to invest, what should they do and how should they play in shaping the future of Wales economically? What's your view on that?
Firstly, I would say that I think Wales has many talents and many assets, and I think anyone who wants to invest in Wales now should do so, even within the current system. I think, and in the current economic climate, I think Wales is a great destination for anyone across the world to invest in, and that includes the diaspora. As far as their role, business leaders in the future with regards to this question, I think it would be a shame that we didn't bring everyone with us into this discussion. I think I think there's an opportunity for business. If you think of if you were to think, for instance, of having a sort of more local supply chains for businesses, to have the vision to look at how we get the skills that we need. I think there's an opportunity to, as a smaller country, there's an opportunity for us to have industry in the technologies of the future. So things like biosciences, AI. I also think that there's an opportunity for an independent Wales potentially to think about its relationship with Europe. I think Wales is in a particular strong position geographically. If we had Ireland to our west and Europe to the south, and then also our partners in England to the east, I think Wales could be a hub economically for all those different markets. I just think generally that this conversation isn't for just those within politics or those who follow political parties, or have very deep set views with independence or unionism. I think this discussion is for anyone in Wales who has an interest in Wales and who would eventually have a future here, whether they live here now or not. If they came to here and invested, they should be part of the conversation as well. I think it makes business sense in that if we don't have these conversations now and we accept that things are as they are, then I don't think we're going to have the investment and economic development that we need. And so having business leaders within that discussion will help us get to the stage where we can do that, as well as discuss our constitutional future.
Thank you. Finally, then, there's a couple of questions wrapped up in one. What gives you hope about the direction that Wales is currently heading in, and where would you see Wales economically, constitutionally, whichever you choose to discuss, in 15, 20 years' time from now?
Yeah, first of all, I think we've talked a lot on this particular podcast about the things that I think can change, and I think should change, in particular, just to make us a more resilient, financial resilient, and also a more inclusive society. What I would say also, though, is that Wales, as I said in the answer to the previous question, Wales has many assets, and it has a lot of things which we can be proud of. Our Welsh language has survived. Our culture is, it covers not just our history, but also, the many different people from across the world who have chosen Wales to be their home. I think that enriches us as a country. We also have very talented people who have many skills and many talents to provide the country, but also to give us a better future. Where I see it in the next 15 to 20 years, I think, even though I listed all those good things, I think people are struggling. They are fed up and they are frustrated. And I think unless we have a radical change with regards to the economic development of our communities, then I think people are going to get increasingly frustrated. And I do worry about us polarizing between those who think that devolution is no longer working for them and those who say, and those who disagree with that. I personally feel like devolution and then also independence is our current, present and future. But I think unless we have a better governance of our communities, then I think there's a danger that people feel more ostracized from the government in Cardiff Bay. And I think I am hopeful. I think in the next, I think with a change of government next year, we'll be able to make a difference. But I think unless we have these conversations, these difficult conversations with people, and to give them hope and confidence in what our plans are, then unless we do that, I think there is a danger to our young democracy. But I personally am very hopeful that we won't go down that route, because I think fundamentally, whatever populist solutions come from other people, I think the Welsh people are very switched on. I think they understand that. I think they accept and understand that devolution is here to stay. Whether they go further down that path to maybe being curious about independence, I think they understand that it's here to stay, and I think they will reject. I think they will reject the populist solutions. At the end of the day, I think they understand that things are difficult, but they can be better. And I think all of us deserve a plan that is well thought out and will actually deliver for the communities, because they're crying out for it. And yeah, I think we're in a good position, but we could be in an even better position, I think.
Neil Roberts, diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
If you enjoyed this conversation, have comments to add, or would like to participate in a future episode of Blueprint Cymru, head over to the New Wales website, which is new.wales.